Hey, it's Brian with the Daily News Autos, and today we have something a little more exotic. This is the 2017 Maserati Levante, the brand's first ever SUV. Now, for a maker of small sports cars and large luxury sedans in pretty low volumes, is an SUV really going to be worthy of that Maserati badge? That's what I'm here to find out, so let's take a look. In terms of styling, the Levante is definitely more tall wagon than true SUV. And it suffers from a little bit of anonymousness that you get with many modern SUVs, especially when finished in a flat white paint job like this. But, in case you couldn't tell it was a Maserati just from looking at it, there's lots of design cues all over, from the huge Trident badge in the front and the ones on the rear pillar here, these iconic Maserati porthole vents, and these awesome 20-inch wheels. The design is more tall wagon than true truck, and while the styling elements of the front end are very busy, the Levante cuts a sleek profile overall. I'm less crazy about the rear end design, as it looks like it could have been lifted from any other modern luxury SUV. And what's with the crease and parallel panel gap in the taillights? 20-inch wheels and that massive gaping grille help keep things aggressive though, and I'd be lying if I said this thing didn't turn lots of heads, even in New York. The interior of the Levante is where this badge really comes into play. It's a sea of fine leather and genuine wood trim, and the design manages to incorporate both classic Maserati elements, like the clock and the embossed logo on the headrest here, and some modern design elements too, to create a pretty pleasing experience. Unfortunately, these seats are not my favorite to sit in, as while the bottom cushion provides plenty of support, the rounded center of the backrest can make it feel like lumbar support is on all the time, and makes the seat feel incredibly stiff on your center back. They are heated and ventilated though, so you shouldn't have too much trouble getting comfortable. Where the Levante's interior disappoints is in the extensive usage of Fiat Chrysler parts bin bits, from the starter button to the 8.4-inch touchscreen. On one hand, it makes this exotic instantly familiar and somewhat usable, but on the other, it may turn you off to this truck if you've owned any other FCA product, as every time you fire up the Levante, you'll be reminded of a Challenger. Despite being a small company, Maserati reaps the benefits of being part of the Fiat Chrysler organization, although it's not always perfect. But they do get to use the excellent 8.4-inch Uconnect touchscreen, which has been improved for this year and is faster than ever before. The 8.4-inch Chrysler-sourced touchscreen includes Apple CarPlay and Android Auto functionality in case you don't want to deal with the user interface, but overall it's pretty easy to use. There's an optional Harman Kardon stereo which sounds fantastic at full volume, and there's an adjustable center display like you'd find in other Fiat Chrysler products. However, the steering wheel controls used to configure the center display can be a little bit confusing, and there's no button to turn off stop-start functionality, which can get a bit annoying when driving in the city, especially with a car as loud and ferocious as this one. The stacked dial and volume knob that are mounted on the center console can be confusing as well, and while the dial controls functionality on the touchscreen, you're better off just using your fingers up there, as it doesn't make too much sense to spin the wheel. With the optional driver assistance package, the Levante is loaded with safety technology, including adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, lane departure warning, front collision warning with emergency brake assist, rear cross path detection, and a 360-degree camera that can make this SUV pretty easy to park even in tight situations. Now, when you buy a Maserati, you're not necessarily just paying for the badge. Of course, you want some Italian performance as well, and thankfully the Levante delivers. The heart of this beast is a 3-liter twin-turbo V6 that makes 424 horsepower and 428 pound-feet of torque in this S trim. Now, that might sound like a lot, and it is. When you put your pedal to the floor, this thing can get up and moving. It goes 0 to 60 in about 5 seconds. But interestingly enough, the quarter-mile time is about on par with something like the Jaguar F-Pace, which is actually a lot cheaper than this truck. No matter though, it is an Italian V6, and that means it sounds fantastic. Pop it into sport mode to open the optional exhaust flaps, drop it a cog or two, put your foot down, and oh man, that sound is fantastic, and it's all natural too. Maserati says that they use natural engine tuning and they don't pipe any of the sound through the speakers, like some of the German manufacturers are guilty of doing. I'm on board, even though the gas mileage isn't going to be stellar. You'll get about 15 or 16 miles to the gallon in this thing, and yes, that is pretty horrible, but you're driving an Italian SUV, and how many times can you say that? Of course, if an SUV is going to wear a Maserati badge, it better deliver on some driving experience promises. And thankfully, the Levante does, mostly. The steering is well weighted, but can be a little bit light on center, and when you're throwing it into a corner, there's actually not much feedback to speak of. And for a truck this large, you really want to feel the road as much as possible so that you know when grip might be at a loss. Speaking of grip, this S model boasts an all-wheel drive system, but it is totally rear biased, so you can throw some power to the front wheels, but it actually sort of makes the Levante understeer a little bit when you're throwing it into a corner. That might have more to do with the heft of this vehicle than it does with the all-wheel drive system, but still, it's not quite a dynamic handler as the Porsche Cayenne GTS or something like that. The adjustable air suspension does help things a little bit, and you can lower it to the ground with a dial that's located right down here, and you can also raise it all the way up for off-road mode. But be aware that if you're going to use sport mode on less than perfect roads, it can make the ride pretty harsh. I do have some quibbles though with the driving experience. The 8-speed automatic transmission can feel a little overworked sometimes, and when you're in automatic mode, the shifts can seem really long. Also, when I was crawling along in stop and go traffic, there were a few times where the transmission would actually stall and pop me into neutral, so that I had to come to a stop, start the car again, and go back into drive. Oh, and don't even get me started on this shifter. It's the same as in a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and the motion is just downright confusing. But other than that, it's still a Maserati, and it drives like one. Overall, both the Porsche Cayenne and the Jaguar F-Pace are a little more pleasing to drive. But frankly, this SUV is exciting, and it makes me giggle in a way that other SUVs just don't when I put my foot down. I think that's something to be celebrated. As far as performance luxury SUVs go, I'm not quite ready to put the Levante at the top of its class. The Porsche Cayenne feels better built and better to drive, and even the Jaguar F-Pace S is a little bit sportier in the corners, and you'll save a pretty penny over this thing, which costs almost $95,000. Still, if you want that engine sound and you really want the Maserati badge, well, who am I to tell you no? I'm Brian with the Daily News Autos, and we'll see you next time.